Welcome to the Adventure High podcast, where we get you high on adventure.
All right, welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're tackling, altitude sickness.
Oh, a fascinating topic and a crucial one for anyone venturing into the high mountains.
Exactly. And to really get into it, we're going to look back at a specific event, the 1934 German expedition to Nanga Parbat.
Nanga Parbat, a mountain steeped in mountaineering history and tragedy.
Yeah, exactly. We're using excerpts from Chapter 5 of a book on the expedition, and let me tell you, it's a gripping read.
It really highlights how, even back then, climbers were pushing the limits of human endurance, but often without a full understanding of the risks involved.
Especially when it came to altitude. The book really zeroes in on the story of Alfred Drexel, one of the climbers on that expedition.
His story, sadly, is a classic case of how altitude sickness can sneak up on you.
It starts so subtly, right? He complains of headaches. I mean, we've all had headaches. It's easy to dismiss, especially when you're focused on a larger goal.
And that's the thing about altitude sickness. It can be so deceptive. The early symptoms can mimic, just normal fatigue or exertion.
And these climbers, they were mostly experienced in the Alps. So maybe they just assumed it was, par for the course.
The book kind of hints at that they might have missed those early warning signs because they attributed them to, the challenges of the climb itself.
But then Drexel's condition, it just deteriorates rapidly. He starts experiencing delirium, then loses consciousness.
It's a stark reminder that at those extreme altitudes, the human body is really operating on a knife's edge.
It's chilling how the book describes the team's desperate attempts to help him. They try to give him oxygen, but there's this fierce storm raging outside.
So they're trapped, in this incredibly hostile environment, watching their teammates slip away, and they don't fully understand why, let alone how to stop it.
You can almost feel that sense of helplessness, of being at the mercy of these powerful forces.
And it underscores a crucial point that we still grapple with today, that peak physical fitness, it's not always enough. You need to understand the science, how your body reacts to those extreme conditions.
So let's get into that. I mean, what exactly is happening in our bodies when we're at those altitudes?
Well, the root of it all is oxygen. The higher you go, the thinner the air gets, meaning less oxygen with every breath you take.
Okay, that makes sense. Less oxygen in the air, less oxygen for your body.
But here's where it gets tricky. Your body, it tries to compensate for that lack of oxygen by making you breathe faster.
Yeah, like you need to take in more air to get the same amount of oxygen.
Precisely. But that rapid breathing, it also expels more carbon dioxide from your system. And that's crucial for maintaining a stable pH level in your blood.
So our blood chemistry gets thrown off balance.
Exactly. And your body goes into overdrive trying to restore that balance. But sometimes those compensatory mechanisms, they can actually cause harm.
Like what kind of harm?
Well, this imbalance can lead to a buildup of fluid in the lungs. It's called high-altitude pulmonary edema, or HAPE for short. Essentially, you drown from the inside.
That sounds absolutely terrifying.
And then there's high-altitude cerebral edema, or HACE. That's where the fluid builds up around the brain.
And that's what was causing Drexel's headaches and delirium.
Most likely, yes. The book describes it as a hand squeezing your brain, which I think paints a pretty accurate picture of the agonizing pressure you experience.
Wow, that's a vivid and frightening image. But here's the thing that I keep coming back to. These climbers, they were essentially witnessing the effects of HAPE and HACE firsthand, but they didn't really understand what they were seeing, did they?
It's a striking example of how, at that time, European mountaineering hadn't really caught up with the understanding of altitude sickness that existed in other parts of the world.
Like where?
Well, in the Andes, for example, doctors there had already documented these conditions in detail, observed them in their own local populations.
But these European climbers, they just relied on their alpine experience, which clearly wasn't enough.
And that assumption, unfortunately, had tragic consequences. And it's almost ironic. The book mentions that some of these Himalayan climbers, they actually advocated for acclimatization in their writing, like they knew it was important.
But then they didn't really put it into practice.
Not fully, no. It's like they understood it in theory, but maybe they didn't grasp how critical it was in those extreme environments.
And you got to figure, I mean, there was other stuff going on too, right? Like the book mentions the political climate in Germany at the time.
Ah, yes. The pressure to succeed.
Yeah, Germany was in a period of national resurgence. And these climbers, they were seen as heroes.
Symbols of strength and national pride.
Exactly. So you can imagine the weight of those expectations, right? How that might have affected their decision making.
Absolutely. I mean, it makes you wonder, how much did that pressure contribute to, their willingness to push on despite the risks?
It's like even when faced with clear warning signs, they felt this need to keep going.
It's a point the book actually connects to modern day adventurers too. That drive to push limits, to conquer the mountain.
Oh yeah, totally. It's almost like a human instinct.
But that instinct, it can sometimes overshadow the importance of safety, of listening to your body's signals.
And it wasn't just the European climbers who were vulnerable, right? The book makes it clear that the Sherpas, the porters, they were just as susceptible to altitude sickness.
That's a common misconception. People think that because Sherpas live at high altitude, they're immune.
Right. Like they have some magical adaptation.
Well, they do have certain genetic adaptations, that's true. But everyone has a limit.
So even with generations of experience living in the mountains, their bodies were still affected.
Beyond a certain altitude, yeah. Around 16,500 feet, the human body starts to deteriorate. And that's regardless of where you come from.
But they did have their own traditional methods for dealing with those risks, right? Like the ferrying system the book talks about.
Yes, ferrying. That was a clever strategy. Instead of carrying all their supplies to the higher camps in one go, they would move them up in stages.
Okay, so like a little bit at a time.
Exactly. They'd carry loads to a higher camp, then return to a lower camp to rest and acclimatize, and then repeat the process.
So like a more gradual approach.
And a safer one. It minimized the risk of altitude sickness.
So they kind of understood the importance of acclimatization, even if they didn't, have the scientific explanation for it.
Precisely. It was knowledge gained through generations of living and working in those extreme environments.
Which makes it even more, kind of baffling that Willy Merkel, the expedition leader, he decided to abandon that system.
Yeah, that was a pivotal moment in the story, and one that raises a lot of questions.
Like why? Why would he do that?
Well, the book offers some clues. It mentions the time pressure, that they were racing against the monsoon season.
So they had to move quickly.
And then there was the political pressure, of course, that constant need to prove themselves.
To bring home a victory for Germany.
Oh, exactly. The book also kind of suggests that Merkel, he wasn't actually the strongest climber himself.
Interesting.
So maybe he felt insecure about that. And bringing everyone to the higher camps, it might have been a way to avoid disputes.
About who would actually get to summit.
Precisely.
So a combination of external and internal pressures kind of pushed him towards this decision that put the whole team at risk.
Yes, and it brings up an interesting point about leadership in these kind of challenging environments. The book actually quotes Angsering, a well-known Sherpa.
Oh, okay. What did he say?
He said that a traditional leader's role was to stay behind, to organize and ensure the safety of the team.
Not necessarily to reach the summit themselves.
Exactly, which is a very different perspective on leadership, putting the well-being of the group above individual achievement.
Huh. That's kind of powerful.
It speaks to the wisdom of the Sherpa community, I think, that understanding of the delicate balance between ambition and safety.
So with the ferrying system abandoned, the expedition they kept pushing toward the summit.
And they were making progress. The book describes them reaching Camp 7. They even gave it a nickname, Whipped Cream.
Whipped Cream.
Yeah. There's a real sense of excitement, of anticipation. They're so close to their goal.
But then 3 of the porters, they turned back.
Yes, just 3 days before the planned summit push, they can't handle the altitude.
And that's a huge red flag, right?
You would think so. But in the heat of the moment, it seems to have been overlooked.
It's like they were so focused on the summit that they kind of lost sight of everything else.
And it's here that the book really zooms in on one climber, Beck told. He has to descend with those sick porters.
Oh, wow. So he's seeing firsthand the effects of altitude sickness.
And you can sense his growing concern. But at the same time, there's this poignant irony. He still believes they'll reach the summit the next day.
Oh, wow. Like he's still holding on to that hope.
Yeah. Even as he's witnessing the harsh reality of what altitude can do.
And then the weather changes, right?
Yeah.
The book describes this heavy snowfall at Camp 4.
Which essentially cuts off the supply lines to the summit team.
So they're stranded.
Isolated in an incredibly hostile environment, and the consequences of their lack of understanding about altitude, they're about to become all too clear.
It's like, knowing what we know now about altitude sickness and the storm, it's hard not to feel like worried about what's going to happen to them.
It's a stark reminder that preparation and understanding the risks, it's not just about mountaineering, it's about any challenge we face.
So we've talked about Drexel and the climbers' kind of naivete about altitude sickness and the pressure they were under and the Sherpas. But why does this all matter? I mean, this was almost 100 years ago.
It might seem like ancient history, but the lessons from this expedition, they resonate even today.
In what way?
Well, it makes you think about risk assessment, about how we make decisions when the stakes are high.
The book, it draws some pretty interesting parallels to modern day adventurers too.
Oh, absolutely. The time constraints, the drive to push limits, it's something a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah, for sure. Even if we're not, climbing mountains, we all have deadlines and pressure to perform, and that feeling of we got to push ourselves further.
And it's easy to get caught up in that, to ignore the warning signs.
Yeah, totally. Just like those climbers, they were so focused on their goal, on making Germany proud, that they kind of lost sight of the risks.
And those risks, they had devastating consequences.
So it's what's the takeaway here? What can we learn from this whole story?
I think it comes down to humility, to understanding our limits, and to seeking out expert knowledge.
Not just assuming that we know everything.
Exactly, because sometimes those assumptions, they can be deadly.
This deep dive, it's really been, it's been kind of sobering,
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. About the power of nature and the importance of being prepared.
It leaves us with a question. How do you think this story would have played out if those climbers, if they'd had a better grasp of altitude sickness, if they hadn't been so driven by the political pressure?
That's a good question. One that maybe each of us should think about. What are the forces that are shaping our own decisions?
And are we really considering the risks?
Thanks for joining us on this journey back in time to Nanga Parbat. It's been a fascinating and kind of sobering look at human ambition and the limits of endurance.
And a reminder that some lessons they're learned the hard way.
Well, that's it for this deep dive. See you next time.
This is the Adventure High podcast, where we get you high on adventure.